Hey, have you ever felt like you were watching, I don't know, a slow-motion train wreck? Knowing something massive, something terrible was about to happen, and you were just powerless to stop it.
Yeah, that kind of dread.
Think about that feeling for a second. Now, dial that feeling up to 11 and transport yourself back to 1683. For the people of Europe, that wasn't hypothetical.
No, not at all.
It was the very real threat of the Ottoman Empire, this seemingly unstoppable force hammering at their doorstep. And Vienna, the heart of the continent,
Yeah.
was directly in its sights.
It's genuinely hard for us today to fully grasp the sheer scale, the power the Ottoman Empire represented back then. For centuries, they'd been a dominant global force, their territories stretching across huge swaths of land.
Right.
And Vienna wasn't just, another city. It was absolutely crucial strategically. It controlled vital trade routes along the Danube, connected east and west. If Vienna fell, well, it would have ripped a hole right through the heart of Europe. It could have, potentially, led to the subjugation of the entire continent. This wasn't some sudden attack either. It was the culmination, really, of centuries of ambition and careful strategic planning.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we dive deep into the stories, the events that shaped our world. We pull out the essential insights so you don't have to wade through mountains of, well, dusty books.
Exactly.
Today we're unraveling the dramatic, the ultimately world-altering story of the Siege of Vienna 1683, how Europe was defended. Our guides for this journey: historical accounts, mainly the Wikipedia articles on the Battle of Vienna and the key players involved.
Yeah, and our goal isn't just to list the events like a clang line. We want to understand the underlying forces at play, the incredible human drama that unfolded during that siege,
Right.
and crucially, the profound consequences that rippled out from Vienna across the globe, really, what made this moment so pivotal. That's what we're here to explore with you.
So, okay, the Ottoman Empire had been eyeing Vienna for a long time, right? This wasn't their first attempt expanding into this region.
That's absolutely right. Way back, 1566, during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottomans laid siege to the fortress of Sigetvar.
Ah, yes.
Now, they ultimately won that siege, but it took a heavy toll. And crucially, it delayed their advance towards Vienna, basically halted their campaign for that year.
Okay.
It just goes to show you, Vienna's strategic value was recognized decades, even centuries before the big showdown in 1683.
And this massive undertaking in 83, it wasn't something that just poof materialized overnight, was it? There was a significant, very deliberate buildup.
Oh, meticulous is the word I'd use. For years leading up to 1683, under the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Ottomans were engaged in these huge logistical preparations.
Like what, exactly?
Well, they were repairing, even building new roads and bridges leading towards the Holy Roman Empire. Think of it like prepping supply lines for a major military operation, but on a continental scale. They were moving vast quantities of ammunition, cannons, the heavy artillery of the day, and all sorts of vital resources from across their massive empire, moving them towards the Balkans, getting everything in place for a major offensive. It really highlights the sheer scale of their ambition.
But it wasn't just about military might, like boots on the ground, was it? There were also some pretty significant political games being played in the region.
Absolutely. The Ottomans were, well, masters at exploiting internal weaknesses within their opponents' territories. In this case, they were actively supporting Hungarian anti-Habsburg rebels.
The Kuk.
Exactly, the Kuik, which basically means those who opposed Habsburg rule. These rebels were largely Protestant and fiercely resisted Emperor Leopold I's counter-Reformation policies. He was trying to suppress Protestantism within his lands, you see.
Okay.
Their leader was a man named Imre Thukali, and the Ottomans went so far as to recognize him as the king of Upper Hungary, which was territory he'd already seized from the Habsburgs.
So it was a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. Weaken the Habsburgs from within while simultaneously gearing up for a direct military strike.
Precisely.
And there was even a pretty enticing promise dangled in front of these Hungarian rebels, wasn't there?
Indeed, a very big carrot. The Ottomans explicitly promised the Hungarian rebels nothing less than the Kingdom of Vienna if the city fell.
Wow, the whole kingdom.
The whole thing. That's a huge incentive for the Kuruk to throw their lot in with the Ottoman cause. Imagine being promised the keys to one of Europe's most important cities.
It's almost surreal to think that right before this massive clash, there was actually a period of, well, relative peace between these two powers.
That's a really important point, yeah. The Peace of Vasvar in 1664 had established a 20-year truce between the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire,
20 years.
which makes the rapid escalation of tensions in the early 1680s even more striking. It just shows how quickly the whole geopolitical landscape could shift back then.
And that shift, as I understand it, was triggered by increasing skirmishes between Thocoli's forces, the rebels, and the Holy Roman Empire.
Exactly. The border region between the Holy Roman Empire and Hungary, where Thocoli's rebels were operating, it became increasingly volatile in 1681 and 1682. Habsburg forces launched raids into central Hungary,
Right.
and Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha skillfully used these actions as a pretext. He used them to convince Sultan Mehmed IV and his council, the Divan, to authorize a full-scale military campaign.
So he framed the Habsburg actions as aggression.
Precisely. Kara Mustafa argued that these Habsburg incursions were a clear violation of the existing peace treaty, the Peace of Vasvar, and posed a direct threat to Ottoman interests in the region.
Okay, so the Sultan finally gave the green light. But initially, the objectives were a bit more limited, weren't they? Not Vienna straight away.
Yes, that's right. Sultan Mehmed IV initially authorized Kara Mustafa Pasha to advance only as far as Győr, known then as Yenikale, and Komárom, or Komáron. Both were strategically significant fortresses in northwestern Hungary.
So besiege those first.
Exactly. The primary initial military goals were to besiege and capture those key locations.
But it sounds like Kara Mustafa had bigger fish to fry, and things escalated beyond those initial targets pretty quickly.
They certainly did. The Ottoman war machine began to mobilize in January 1682, and a formal declaration of war followed that August. By March 1683, the vanguard, the front units of this massive Ottoman army, began its long march from Edirne, the Ottoman capital.
Way to go.
A very long way. They reached Belgrade by early May. There, they were joined by forces from Transylvania, led by Prince Mihaly Apafi and the Hungarian contingent under Imre Thocoli.
Okay.
And while some Ottoman forces were indeed diverted to besiege Győr, as planned, the main Ottoman army, while it kept going, numbering a staggering 150,000 men, it continued its advance directly towards Vienna.
150,000, that's just an almost unimaginable force for that time. And they weren't the only ones heading in Vienna's direction, were they? There were allies.
No, you're right. In early July, around 40,000 Crimean Tatar troops who were allied with the Ottoman Empire arrived about 40 kilometers east of Vienna.
40,000 Tatars.
Just to put that in perspective, this single contingent was twice the size of the imperial troops initially stationed to defend the entire area around Vienna. The sheer scale of the Ottoman military deployment was designed to create this overwhelming sense of inevitability, just crush any potential resistance before it even began.
Faced with this absolutely enormous force bearing down on them, the Habsburg leadership, the people of Vienna, they must have been in a state of sheer panic.
Understandably so. Utter panic. Emperor Leopold I, along with his entire court and a reported 60,000 Viennese citizens, made the difficult decision to flee the city.
Where did they go?
They sought refuge in the relative safety of Passau, further west. Meanwhile, Charles V, Duke of Lorraine, he was the commander of the imperial forces in the region, he made the strategic assessment that his 20,000 troops were just hopelessly outnumbered.
Yeah, 20,000 against potentially 190,000.
Right. They couldn't effectively defend Vienna against such a massive army. So he made the prudent choice, really, to withdraw his forces towards Linz, hoping to regroup and wait for reinforcements.
So, when the main Ottoman army finally arrived at the gates of Vienna on July 14th, 1683, the city was essentially left to defend itself with a significantly smaller force.
That's correct. The daunting responsibility of defending Vienna fell to Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. He commanded a force of just 15,000 regular soldiers.
15,000.
And around 8,700 determined civilian volunteers. They also had 370 cannons. But they were facing an army that outnumbered them. What, maybe 10 to 1? The odds seemed utterly insurmountable.
It sounds like a truly desperate situation. But there were at least some efforts underway to prepare the city for what was coming, weren't there? Fortifications.
Yes, thankfully. There was a Saxon engineer, Georg Rimpler. She'd been hired by the Holy Roman Empire specifically to prepare for potential conflicts with the Ottomans.
Okay.
As soon as the threat became clear, he immediately began working feverishly to bolster Vienna's existing fortifications. You see, the pre-war strategic plans had focused on engaging the Ottomans much further east, near Győr.
Right, the original target.
But the speed and overwhelming scale of the Turkish advance just rendered those plans obsolete. Rimpler had to rapidly adapt and strengthen Vienna's defenses right there, right then, in anticipation of the inevitable siege.
So, with the Ottoman army now encamped outside its walls, the siege of Vienna officially began. What were the very first moves? July 14th.
On the very day they arrived, July 14th, Kara Mustafa Pasha sent the customary demand for the city's surrender. It was standard practice.
And Starhemberg.
Count Starhemberg, fully aware of the horrific fate of Perchtoldsdorf just days prior, where a similar surrender had been met with a brutal massacre, resolutely refused to capitulate. No way.
The massacre at Perchtoldsdorf. That must have cast a terrifying shadow over Vienna, solidifying their determination to resist at all costs. Can you tell us a bit more about what happened there?
It was, well, an act of unimaginable brutality. The inhabitants of Perchtoldsdorf, a town just south of Vienna, were given the same ultimatum: surrender, and your lives will be spared.
Standard promise.
Right. And trusting these assurances, they handed over the keys to their town. But the Ottoman forces betrayed their promise, turned on the defenseless population, massacred the men, enslaved the women and children.
Terrific.
This betrayal served as a stark, terrifying warning to the people of Vienna about what awaited them if they surrendered. It undoubtedly strengthened their resolve to fight to the bitter end.
A truly heinous act. So, with Vienna's defiant refusal, the Ottoman siege operations officially kicked off on July 17th. What exactly did this involve? What does a siege look like back then?
Well, this marked the beginning of a relentless, brutal campaign to break down Vienna's defenses. The Ottomans began digging intricate networks of trenches, zigzagging closer and closer to the city walls.
Mapping.
Exactly. They established siege lines, effectively cutting Vienna off from the outside world. No supplies in, no messengers out easily. And they strategically positioned their heavy artillery to begin this constant bombardment, aiming to create breaches in the city's fortifications.
Trying to knock holes in the walls.
Their ultimate goal was to create a large enough opening that their infantry could exploit, storm Vienna, and take the city.
While Vienna was under this intense pressure from the outside, desperate efforts were being made somewhere else to assemble a relief force, weren't they?
Absolutely. A pivotal development during this time was the forging of a crucial alliance between Poland, under its formidable and really experienced King John III Sobieski,
Sobieski.
and Emperor Leopold I. This alliance brought the legendary Polish hussars, renowned as some of the most effective, most fearsome cavalry in all of Europe, into the ranks of the existing Allied forces who were mobilizing to save Vienna.
Sobieski was already a major figure in his own right, wasn't he?
Mm.
Especially when it came to confronting the power of the Ottoman Empire.
He certainly was. King John III Sobieski had already earned this formidable reputation for his exceptional military leadership, particularly through his extensive and successful campaigns against the Ottoman army before.
Like Khotin.
Exactly. His decisive, crushing victory at the Battle of Khotin back in 1673 had already firmly established him as a significant threat to Ottoman ambitions in the region. Now he was poised to take overall command of a combined European Allied army, estimated to be between 70,000 and 80,000 soldiers.
Still potentially outnumbered, though.
A substantial force, yes, but still potentially smaller than the reported, maybe exaggerated, 150,000 Ottoman troops laying siege to Vienna.
Bringing together such a diverse, multinational army that must have created its own set of logistical and, well, leadership challenges, especially with so much at stake.
You're absolutely right. Tensions, disagreements, they almost immediately arose, especially between Poland and the various German states, particularly Austria.
Over what? Money.
Over the critically important issues of paying for the troops' wages and ensuring adequate supplies during the long march to relieve Vienna. Sobieski was adamant that Poland, despite contributing a significant portion of the relief force, shouldn't have to bear the primary financial burden of its intervention.
Fair point, maybe.
He rightly argued, that it was his army's efforts that would ultimately save the city and, by extension, much of Europe. The Habsburg leadership found themselves in a difficult spot, scrambling to secure the necessary funds to pay their own troops, while also trying to negotiate fair agreements with the Polish to manage their expenses.
And these negotiations weren't always smooth sailing, were they? I can imagine some pretty tense moments. Frictions.
No, there was considerable friction, and at times, outright hostility. Sobieski, a proud and experienced monarch, insisted he wouldn't bear the cost of his army's march to Vienna while they were still on Polish soil.
Okay.
Eventually, after a lot of debate, a lot of negotiation, a compromise was reached. The Polish government would cover costs incurred within Poland. Emperor Leopold I would fund the Polish forces once they crossed into imperial territory.
Right.
And there was even this rather unusual, maybe pragmatic clause included in the agreement. It granted Sobieski's troops the first rights to plunder the Ottoman camp if they won.
First dibs on the loot.
Basically, yeah, this detail really underscores the often less than ideal realities, the sometimes crude incentives that underpin these wartime alliances.
Okay, let's shift our focus back to the desperate situation inside the besieged city itself. What specific tactics were the Ottomans using in their relentless efforts to breach Vienna's defenses? You mentioned digging.
Right, the Ottomans primarily relied on well-established siege warfare techniques common for the era. Chief among these were extensive mining operations. Their sappers, these expert military engineers, were digging a complex network of tunnels underneath Vienna's fortifications.
It's terrifying.
A particular focus was the Lobelbestai, a key section of the city walls. The intention was to place large quantities of gunpowder, other explosives, within these tunnels and then detonate them, create massive breaches in the walls that their infantry could then just pour through.
A slow but deadly method.
Terrifyingly effective, yeah, albeit slow and incredibly dangerous, both for the miners and the defenders.
That must have been an incredibly nerve-wracking experience for the defenders. Constantly listening, for the sounds of digging beneath their feet, never knowing when or where the walls might suddenly just explode. Were these Ottoman mining efforts successful in any significant way?
Fortunately for the defenders of Vienna, they were remarkably vigilant and proactive in their countermining efforts.
So they dug back.
Exactly. They established their own network of tunnels and listening posts, and they managed to detect and disarm a significant number of these Ottoman mines, 10 in total, according to some historical accounts.
Wow, 10.
This was absolutely crucial to their defense. Each mine discovered and neutralized represented a potentially devastating breach that was averted. Had even a few of those mines detonated successfully, the outcome of the siege could have been very, very different.
While this underground war of cat and mouse was taking place, the conditions for the people trapped inside Vienna, they must have been deteriorating at an alarming rate. Food, disease.
Indeed. The prolonged siege took a devastating toll on both the Viennese military garrison and the civilian population trapped within the walls. They endured relentless artillery bombardment day and night, the constant threat of underground explosions from the Ottoman mines, and yes, rapidly dwindling supplies of food, water, medicine,
And casualty.
tragically high. It's estimated that approximately half of their initial numbers were lost. Due to combat, disease that spread rapidly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions, and just the general hardships of being under siege for so long.
Despite these horrific conditions and the constant threat of attack, Kara Mustafa seemed absolutely determined, obsessed almost, with capturing Vienna before the much-anticipated relief army could finally arrive on the scene.
That was his fundamental strategic imperative. He fully understood that time was absolutely of the essence. The longer the siege dragged on, the greater the likelihood of a powerful relief force materializing and posing a direct threat to his own massive army. His primary focus remained on breaching Vienna's defenses and securing the city as quickly as humanly possible. He knew that a prolonged siege risked everything he'd worked for.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to the climax. The staging of the battle itself on September 12, 1683. The relief army, made up of so many different nationalities, different allegiances, somehow managed to come together and mobilize relatively quickly. How did they actually pull that off? How did they achieve this remarkable feat of coordination?
It truly was a remarkable achievement, considering everything, despite the fact that the relief army was this patchwork of Polish, Imperial, Bavarian, Saxon, other contingents, and they only had a limited amount of time to prepare their response.
Yeah.
And surprisingly effective command structure quickly emerged. It was centered around the strong leadership of King John III Sobieski and his highly experienced Polish hussars. Sobieski's significant prestige as a military leader, his proven track record against the Ottomans, that undoubtedly played a crucial role in uniting and motivating these diverse allied forces.
And the previously tricky issue of who was going to pay for all these troops and their supplies, That also got resolved in time for them to actually fight.
Yes, the broader alliance against the Ottomans, known as the Holy League, managed to address the immediate financial crisis. They pooled all available government funds from the participating nations. They secured substantial loans from wealthy European bankers, noble families,
Even Pope chipped in.
and even received significant financial contributions directly from the Pope himself, Innocent XI. This resolution of the financial issues was absolutely essential. It ensured the relief army could effectively march towards Vienna, sustain itself, and ultimately be ready to fight when they got there.
So with the Allied army finally assembled, funded, and ready for action, how were these diverse forces strategically deployed for the impending decisive battle? Where did everyone line up?
The deployment was carefully organized to maximize the strengths of each contingent. The German forces that included the imperial troops under Charles of Lorraine, plus the Bavarian and Saxon contingents, they were strategically positioned on the left and in the center of the Allied battle line,
Okay, left and center.
with Charles of Lorraine holding overall command of this sector. The crucial right wing of the Allied army was formed by the powerful Polish forces, led personally by King Sobieski himself.
And he was in overall command.
Yes, Sobieski held overall supreme command of the entire relief army.
Interestingly, there's a rather intriguing mention of the Wallachian forces playing a role in all of this, although perhaps not in the way that the Ottoman command had anticipated.
That's a fascinating and often overlooked detail, yeah. Urban Cantacuzino, the Prince of Wallachia, was technically an Ottoman vassal, meaning his troops were obligated, on paper, to serve as part of the Ottoman army. But Cantacuzino harbored secret sympathies for the Christian coalition and actively worked against the Ottoman cause behind the scenes. In a critical act of sabotage just before the main battle,
What did he do?
his Wallachian forces, who were stationed to guard a crucial pontoon bridge over the Danube River at Brigitino Island, they deliberately abandoned their posts and dismantled the bridge.
Pulled it down. Wow.
This action significantly disrupted Ottoman communications and potentially hampered their ability to effectively maneuver their forces on the battlefield. A small but potentially significant act.
So even before the main clash of armies, there was already this subtle but significant act of defiance against the Ottoman siege. And the Ottomans themselves launched a preemptive attack in the early hours of September 12th, didn't they?
Yeah.
To disrupt the Allies.
Yes, at approximately 4 a.m. on September 12th, well before the Holy League forces were fully deployed and organized, the Ottoman army launched a surprise attack. Their likely intention was exactly that: disrupt the Allied formations, catch them off guard, prevent them from deploying in an effective battle order.
But the imperial forces, under the command of Charles of Lorraine, were apparently ready, or ready enough, to meet this initial Ottoman assault head-on.
They were. The Imperial Army, along with other Imperial Allied forces positioned in the center of the line, launched immediate and determined counterattacks. After hours of intense, heavy fighting,
Back and forth.
yeah, including multiple Ottoman counteroffensives, the Imperial forces managed to successfully capture several strategically important fortified villages located on the flanks of the Ottoman siege lines, places like Nestorf and Heiligenstadt.
Yeah.
By midday, the Imperial forces had inflicted significant damage on the Ottoman lines and were even nearing a potential breakthrough in the center. Things were looking up for the Allies.
It sounds like the battle was a brutal, fiercely contested affair right from the very beginning. But Kara Mustafa, the Ottoman commander, he still had his elite units, the Janissaries and Sipayas, held back in reserve, didn't he? She hadn't committed everything.
That's correct. Despite the mounting pressure from the advancing imperial forces, the clear danger posed by the approaching relief army, Kara Mustafa made a critical strategic decision. He held back some of his most elite, most experienced troops, the Janissary infantry and the Sipahi heavy cavalry.
Why? What was the plan?
His intention was to utilize these elite units for a final, decisive assault directly on the city of Vienna itself. He still believed, or hoped, that the besieged city would fall before the relief army could fully engage and overwhelm his own forces.
Even though the mining had failed.
Even though, as we discussed, their earlier attempts to breach Vienna's walls through mining operations had largely failed, it was a gamble.
So as the afternoon wore on, the battle raging across the hills outside Vienna, what were the key movements, the turning points that ultimately led to the decisive outcome?
Okay, around 3:30 p.m., the German forces on the left flank of the Allied army. They were under considerable pressure but showed remarkable resilience. They renewed their offensive.
Pushing hard again.
They initially faced fierce resistance from the Ottoman lines, struggled to make significant progress. However, by about 5 p.m., their persistent attacks began to pay off. They successfully advanced, capturing the strategically vital villages of Unterdobling and Oberdubling.
Getting closer.
This brought the imperial forces dangerously close to the central Ottoman position, the key defensive point known as the Türkenschanze. It was a heavily fortified redoubt, served as a key command and control center for the Ottoman army.
And it was at roughly this same time that the legendary Polish cavalry, including the famed winged hussars, finally made their dramatic, almost cinematic entrance onto the battlefield.
Yes, it's a moment that has become absolutely etched in the annals of history. Eyewitness accounts describe the Polish cavalry slowly, deliberately emerging from the cover of a nearby forest around 4 p.m.
What a sight that must have been.
Their arrival, this magnificent spectacle of thousands of heavily armored horsemen with their distinctive feathered wings. It was met with thunderous cheers of encouragement from the weary Allied infantry. They'd been fighting for hours, eagerly awaiting their arrival.
But their initial engagement wasn't the full-scale, earth-shattering charge that history often depicts, was it? There was a more cautious initial probe first.
That's right. Initially a smaller but still formidable detachment of about 120 hussars engaged in what was essentially a probing charge against the Ottoman lines.
Testing the waters.
Exactly. A crucial tactical maneuver. It effectively tested the strength, the vulnerabilities of the Ottoman defenses. It revealed their susceptibility to a well-executed cavalry attack. However, this initial charge also resulted in significant casualties for the hussars. It highlighted the risks.
Okay.
During this initial engagement, the Polish cavalry began maneuvering in a way that threatened the Türkenschanze from the west, adding to the pressure already being applied by the Saxons and Bavarians from the northwest and the Austrians advancing from the north.
So the Türkenschanze was being hit from multiple sides. Facing this multi-pronged assault, the clear threat to his command center, Kara Mustafa made a significant and ultimately fateful decision, didn't he?
He did. The Ottoman Grand Vizier, facing increasing pressure on all fronts, witnessing the steady advance of the Allied forces, made the critical decision to abandon the heavily fortified Türkenschanze.
He left it.
He ordered his remaining forces there to retreat further south towards his main headquarters located in the Ottoman encampment. This was a major turning point in the battle. It signaled a significant loss of confidence, of control on the Ottoman side.
And by this point in the day, the morale of the Ottoman troops, they'd endured weeks of siege warfare, hours of intense battle. That was already starting to crumble, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The prolonged failure of their mining attempts to breach Vienna's walls, the stalled, ultimately unsuccessful assault on the city itself, and the relentless advance of the Holy League infantry on their key defensive positions like the Türkenschanze. It had all taken a significant toll.
Exhausted and demoralized.
Many soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and some were already beginning to flee the battlefield, sensing the impending disaster. The writing was on the wall.
Which then set the stage for the truly legendary, decisive cavalry charge that would ultimately seal the victory for the Holy League and lift the siege of Vienna, the big one.
Precisely. Less than 3 hours after that initial probing charge by the smaller group of hussars, the full might of the Holy League cavalry, with the Polish winged hussars right at its very forefront, launched their devastating, iconic attack.
Good charge.
This massive, thundering charge shattered the remaining Ottoman lines, sent their forces scattering in complete disarray. It is considered one of the largest cavalry charges in history, and it proved to be the decisive blow. Secured a complete, resounding victory for the Allied forces and the successful defense of Vienna.
A truly dramatic, historic end to a long and incredibly arduous siege, and who was recorded as being the first of the relieving army to actually enter the liberated city, Vienna.
The first Catholic officer officially recorded to have entered the relieved city of Vienna right after the battle was Louis William, Margrave of Baden-Baden. He led his dragoons in.
A symbolic moment.
Absolutely. Marked the end of the siege, the liberation of the long-suffering population.
And King Sobieski, in his moment of ultimate triumph, famously paraphrased Julius Caesar's iconic words.
Yes, echoing Caesar's famous Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Sobieski, in a letter written shortly after the battle, proudly declared, Venimus, vidimus, Deus vitit.
Meaning?
We came, we saw, God conquered.
It was a powerful, deeply felt statement, acknowledged both the swiftness of the victory and his profound belief in divine intervention playing a part.
While the battle itself resulted in a clear victory for the Christian forces, the preceding siege of Vienna, it was marked by significant brutality, horrific atrocities committed by the Ottoman forces against the civilian population. We touched on Perchtoldsdorf. Sadly, that is a grim and undeniable truth. Throughout the duration of the siege of Vienna, Ottoman troops engaged in widespread, systematic pillaging of the surrounding countryside. Countless surviving civilians were captured, forcibly taken as slaves into the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
The horrific massacre at Perchtoldsdorf, which we discussed earlier, stands as a particularly brutal and well-documented example of this widespread brutality, this disregard for human life.
And the sheer scale of this enslavement, the human suffering it caused, it was truly staggering, wasn't
Oh, yeah.
it? The numbers.
Tragically so. Historical estimates suggest somewhere in the region of 57,220 people were kidnapped and enslaved during the Ottoman pillage of the Austrian and Hungarian border zones in 1683 alone.
57,000.
This immense number included men, married and unmarried women, even some from noble families, and a particularly heartbreaking number of young children. It starkly underscores the immense human cost, the profound suffering inflicted during this conflict.
In the immediate aftermath of this crushing defeat, the Ottoman perspective on the Battle of Vienna, the entire campaign, it was understandably one of profound disappointment, of loss. How do they view it?
Contemporary Ottoman historian Sildar Findiklili Mehmet Aga described the Battle of Vienna as an absolutely enormous defeat, a catastrophic failure for the Ottoman Empire.
Strong words.
He went so far as to call it the most disastrous event to have befallen the Ottoman state since its very foundation, way back in 1299. This historical assessment truly highlights the immense psychological shock, the significant strategic impact that this loss had on the Ottoman leadership and the entire empire.
And the casualties suffered by both sides during the siege and the final battle were substantial, although there was a significant disparity between them, right?
The Ottoman Empire suffered very heavy losses indeed. Conservative estimates suggest at least 20,000 Ottoman soldiers perished during the course of the lengthy siege itself, succumbing to disease, starvation, the constant fighting.
Okay, 20,000 during the siege.
Then, an additional 8,000 to perhaps as many as 20,000 were killed or captured during the decisive battle against Sobieski's relief forces. Tucker estimates 8K, 15K dead, 5K, 10K captured. Podhorodecki suggests around 15K dead in the battle, so high numbers either way.
And the Holy League.
In stark contrast, the casualties suffered by the Holy League relief force under Sobieski's command were significantly lower. Podhorodecki estimates around 3,500 men killed and wounded, including about 1,300 Polish soldiers. Tucker puts it a bit higher, maybe 4,500 total.
Still significant losses, but much less.
Much less. The Viennese garrison and the civilian population trapped within the city, of course, also endured immense suffering and loss, with roughly half of their initial numbers perishing due to the various horrors of the siege, as we mentioned.
As was the common practice in warfare of that era, the victorious Allied forces also reaped the material spoils of war from the defeated Ottoman army's vast encampment, the plunder Sobieski negotiated for.
Indeed. The Holy League troops and the relieved citizens of Vienna seized a considerable amount of valuable loot from the hastily abandoned Ottoman army encampment. King Sobieski himself, in that letter written to his wife just after the battle, vividly described the extent of these captured treasures.
What did he mention?
He mentioned vast quantities of tents, sheep, cattle, camels, and proclaimed it a victory beyond anything previously witnessed. The Ottoman enemy utterly ruined, he said, their wealth now in the hands of the victors.
Despite the overwhelming sense of victory, the immediate aftermath wasn't entirely harmonious amongst the diverse Allied forces, was it? I understand some tensions quickly arose, frictions again.
You are correct. Tensions, disagreements quickly surfaced among the victorious allies. King Sobieski, recognizing the pivotal role played by his Polish forces, insisted that his troops should be granted the first choice of the spoils taken from the Ottoman camp.
As agreed, technically.
As technically agreed, yes. But this demand understandably led to resentment, ill-feeling among the German and Austrian troops, who felt they were being unfairly relegated to whatever was left over.
Okay.
Furthermore, the Protestant Saxon contingent, who had marched to contribute to the relief of the predominantly Catholic city, they reportedly faced verbal abuse, religious taunts from the Viennese populace.
Seriously?
Yeah.
After they helped save the city.
Which led to their immediate and somewhat disgruntled departure from the area without even participating in the distribution of the captured Ottoman wealth. Not a great look for Vienna at that moment.
No. And what ultimately became of the key figures on the Ottoman side, particularly the ambitious, ultimately unsuccessful Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha.
Ah, Kara Mustafa. In the wake of the devastating defeat at Vienna, he was held directly responsible for the catastrophic failure of the campaign. On December 25th, 1683, just a few months after the battle.
Christmas Day.
Yes, he was executed in Belgrade by the traditional Ottoman method reserved for high-ranking officials who had fallen out of favor strangulation with a silk rope upon the direct order of Sultan Mehmed IV.
A grim end.
His ambition had led to a monumental failure with severe consequences for the Ottoman Empire and ultimately for his own life.
The decisive victory at Vienna clearly had profoundly significant, long-lasting consequences for the balance of power in Europe, marked a major turning point in the relationship between the Ottoman Empire and the European powers.
Absolutely. A huge turning point. Count Starhemberg, the heroic defender of Vienna, immediately ordered the extensive repair of the city's damaged fortifications. Vienna would never again be vulnerable to an Ottoman siege.
And broader consequences.
On a much broader scale, this victory marked a clear turning point in the centuries-long struggle. King Sobieski continued his military campaigns, successfully liberating Grau, much of northwestern Hungary from Ottoman control, although an outbreak of dysentery eventually halted his further progress. Meanwhile, Charles V, Duke of Lorraine, capitalized on the Ottoman weakness. He went on to recapture the strategically vital city of Buda and most of Hungary by 1686. By 1687, the Habsburg had firmly established their control over southern Hungary and Transylvania. They even managed to recapture Belgrade in 1688. The momentum had decisively shifted against the Ottomans.
It's fascinating to learn that even distant powers like Safavid Iran, located far to the east, took significant notice of the Ottoman Empire's dramatic defeat at Vienna.
Yes, the news of the crushing Ottoman defeat apparently sparked widespread celebrations in Safavid Iran. Historical accounts suggest the news was delivered to the then Shah Suleimanari in a particularly dramatic fashion.
How so?
Well, the details are a bit hazy, but the Shah was reportedly so encouraged by the Ottoman setback that he even seriously contemplated launching a military campaign to retake Baghdad, which had been under Ottoman control for several decades.
Did they do it?
Ultimately, no. The Safavid leadership decided against such a large-scale undertaking, primarily due to concerns about their own internal military strength and the potential risks involved in removing what was effectively a buffer state between their own territories and the expanding Christian European powers.
Interesting calculation. So the Battle of Vienna truly served as a catalyst, setting the stage for a fundamental, lasting shift in the geopolitical landscape of Europe for centuries to come.
Without a doubt. The victory at Vienna directly paved the way for the extensive Habsburg reconquest of Hungary and large parts of the Balkans that had been under Ottoman rule for centuries. The Treaty of Karlowitz, signed in 1699, formally ceded vast territories, including much of Hungary, to the Habsburg Empire.
The high watermark.
Historically, the Battle of Vienna is widely, and rightly, considered to be the definitive end of the Ottoman Empire's long, often relentless expansion into the heart of Europe. The high watermark, exactly.
The victory of Vienna also had significant religious and cultural ramifications across Europe, didn't it? It wasn't just about territory.
It certainly wasn't. Pope Innocent XI, recognizing the immense significance of the victory and acknowledging the widely held belief in the protection afforded by the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Sobieski was devoted to her, right?
Yes, Sobieski had specifically entrusted his kingdom to her intercession before the battle. So the Pope commemorated the pivotal event by extending the Feast of the Holy Name of Mary to the entire Catholic Church, setting its annual observance on September 12th, the very day of the battle.
Still celebrated today.
Indeed. He also bestowed significant honors upon King Sobieski, added the Polish crowned white eagle to his own papal coat of arms as a symbol of gratitude, and granted the Polish monarch the prestigious title of Defender of the Faith.
Nice title.
Furthermore, in Vienna itself, a church was erected on the strategically important Kahlenberg Hill overlooking the city in honor of King John III Sobieski and the victory. And numerous plaques, memorials commemorating the heroic defense of the city were also erected, including the Moldauer Kapelle, which houses a replica of the cross carried by the Wallachian ruler Urban Cantacuzino, a silent testament to his crucial, albeit covert, support.
Finally, it's a chilling, somewhat disturbing footnote to history to consider a potential, though not universally accepted, connection between this pivotal historical battle and the horrific events of the September 11th attacks in 2001.
Yes, some controversial theories propose that the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda specifically chose September 11th as the date for their attacks on the United States due to its perceived symbolic significance as the anniversary of the turning point in the Battle of Vienna.
Why that connection?
According to this theory, they may have viewed September 11th, 1683 as a date that marked the beginning of Western dominance over the Islamic world, and intended their attacks 318 years later to represent a symbolic rebirth of Islamic power, a reversal of that historical trajectory.
It's unsettling.
It's a deeply unsettling thought that a pivotal moment in European history, a victory for the defense of a continent, could be twisted and misconstrued centuries later to justify acts of terror and violence on a global scale.
It is a sobering thought indeed. A stark reminder of how historical events can be interpreted, manipulated across time. So to bring it all together, the Siege of Vienna in 1683, it stands as an absolutely monumental turning point in the history of Europe.
Undeniably.
It not only decisively halted the seemingly unstoppable advance of the Ottoman Empire deep into the heart of the continent, but also marked the beginning of their long, gradual decline in the region. This unlikely, sometimes fractious alliance of diverse European powers, galvanized by the courageous, determined defense of Vienna under Count Starhemberg,
Incredible defense.
and ultimately saved by the decisive leadership and military prowess of King John III Sobieski and his Polish cavalry. It serves as a powerful testament, really, to the fact that even the most formidable, seemingly invincible forces can be overcome through unity, resilience, and sheer determination.
And it serves as a profound reminder of the enduring power of human will and the resilience of cultures, of ideas when faced with existential threats. The defense of Vienna in 1683 wasn't just about protecting a single city. It was about safeguarding a way of life, a set of values, the very future of European civilization as they saw it.
Yeah.
The real aha moment for me here is recognizing how a single, albeit incredibly dramatic and hard-fought battle can fundamentally alter the course of history, setting in motion profound, lasting changes that ripple across continents and through centuries.
It truly makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What other seemingly insurmountable historical moments were turned by unexpected alliances, acts of individual courage, or, unforeseen circumstances that we might have overlooked or underestimated?
Good question.
And consider the long-term, almost unimaginable ripple effects of the Battle of Vienna. How did this single event ultimately reshape not only the political map of Europe, but also the cultural, the religious landscape of both Europe and the Middle East in the centuries that followed? That's a lot to ponder well after our deep dive into this incredible story concludes.
Plenty to think about there.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of a truly pivotal moment in history.